Welcome back to another Starman Gaming YouTube video, and it's time once again for another narrative review. This is of the audio drama Fist of Mork, Fist of Gork, or the other way around. I always get the two confused. Which seems appropriate since in so many of GW's models and the kind of fluff behind them, such as the Gorkanaut Morkanaut, you have them even kind of making fun of the fact of trying to struggle to keep track of them. But anyways, this one continues the story of the Hallowed Knights that formerly were under Tarsus the Bullheart, and they're of course being led by Ramus, the Lord Relictor of that particular warrior chamber of the Hallowed Knights, and they are in the realm of Gur, or the realm of beasts, to hunt down Manfred von Karstein and bring him back in chains to Sigmar to be presented to Nagash as a gift and kind of mend the fence between those two, and to unite their armies in their war against chaos. Which obviously, you know, with two beings as powerful as those two and their respective armies being so powerful, that's something that Chaos clearly is not going to want to let happen. But as of yet, Chaos has not shown up in this story. And at the end of the last one, if you remember, we had Manfred show up, kind of corrupt the regular humans, turn them into ghouls that were serving alongside the Stormcasts. Caused a big fight. He killed the Lord Castellan Hamilcar of the Astral Templars that were here. So Hamilcar is currently being reforged in Azir. So he won't be present, but he was driven off by Ramus and Vandalus, the Knight Azeros of the Astral Templars, kind of working together to defeat him. So anyways, they continue on after Manfred von Karstein in this one. And real quickly before we, continue, those are the three main characters of this. Vandalus, the Knight Azeros of the Astral Templars, Hamilcar, who's not currently present, the Lord Castellan of the Astral Templars, and Ramus, the Lord Relictor of the Hallowed Knights, which was the group that was with Tarsus the Bullheart that the initial 4-part audio drama series focused on. Interestingly enough, and kind of at the beginning of this, we have a little bit of internal monologue that Ramus is thinking, and he makes a comment that he had to go through 12 trials as to become a Lord Relictor, which is interesting. We see a little bit more background on kind of how the Lord Relictors are trained, I guess is the appropriate way to say it, for their office. It's pretty interesting in my opinion. The Lord Relictors are currently the office that we know the least about of the Stormcasts, and it's very deliberate. GW and all their stories and all makes the Lord Relictors kind of something of a mystery, right? We don't fully understand them, their purpose and their power. Like, we understand aspects of it, but we don't have as well-rounded of a grasp of it as we do Lord Castellans, the Lord Celestants, the Knight of Zeros, like these other offices. These are, of course, the most shrouded in mystery still, and that's very deliberate, which I like it. But anyways, we see we see the beginning. At the beginning, these two groups of Stormcast that are working together, continuing on their journey. And it's been some time since the end of the first audio drama segment, I guess, and the battle against Manfred. Not an extreme amount of time, but it's been some days they've been pursuing Manfred's forces, until finally they come across this area that's rather interesting, and I mean strange, where there's several dead ogres that are basically impaled on these wooden shafts. We're not talking, massive spikes. We're talking basically like a relatively thin wooden pole, each of them. And as the Stormcasts approach, they come to realize that these are basically zombie ogres, which would be awesome to actually get a model of that. one thing that these stories continue to do for myself is inspire me to take models from outside the Death faction and kind of convert them up into zombies and then field them as the regular ones, but for fluff purposes, kind of make them zombies, or have like a scenario specific piece that's a zombie version of an ogre or an orc or whatever. But anyways, they discover that these ogres are zombies, and they they kind of kill a few of them. And interestingly enough, Rammus is like, free this one, so they do. Rammus also reveals in this scene that Lord Relictors have kind of two forms of sight. They can see into like the spiritual supernatural realm, and they can also see the physical realm. The other Stormcast can't see into the spiritual realm in the same way. So he's able to actually see the spirit of this ogre that's been tied by Manfred's death magic to his dead body to kind of reincarnate or bring him back to life, reanimate is what I'm looking for. Him as kind of a pseudo zombie. And so there's a little bit of a fight between the two of them. Rammus is never really in danger. But it's basically at the point where he's trying to subdue this ogre to get information about where Manfred went and what his plan is and where he's heading. And shortly after this little exchange comes to an end, with the ogre finally agreeing, because the ogre doesn't fully realize that he's dead. I mean, first off, he's an ogre; he's very dim-witted, and secondly, with the spell and all, he's somewhat confused by the spell itself. But anyways, they're ready to continue on, and the building that's kind of dilapidated looking and is where these ogres are, all of a sudden the window busts open and this giant auric head pokes out. And it turns out it's one of these weirdnob shamans, or I can't remember the exact term of it. I believe that's correct. And this is apparently his base, and he's upset that the Stormcast have damaged his toys or playthings, if you will, because he traded Manfred. He doesn't specify that he traded Manfred, but he says that he traded for these undead ogres. And clearly he doesn't have the death magic required to reanimate and kind of sustain these corpses. Only someone skilled in it like Manfred could do so. But anyways, there's an exchange between him and the Stormcast. He casts a magical ability where basically a giant green fist appears, kind of glowing see-through, starts smashing up some of the Stormcast. The Stormcast retaliate. He calls forth his Oryx to his Iron Jaws to come pouring out and fight the Stormcast, and there is a pretty epic battle. And at the climax of this, Rammus calls on Sigmar to help him, and Sigmar sends this massive lightning blast down onto the tower that this weirdnob is at, and just obliterates the tower, so there's very, very, very little left. It literally describes it as looking like a twisted, burnt remains of like a branch that had been struck by lightning. This thing has just been so deformed, and the auric is thrown from it, and is just, he looks like he's been burnt to a crisp. And then the fighting kind of comes to a standstill for a minute, and then the auric rises, kind of coughs a little bit, laughs a little bit, kind of starts brushing off all the like ash and burnt skin, and he starts to call forth his magic again to crush Rammus. And he's like laughing, his eyes start glowing green, he's like empowered by this, and you're kind of like, oh my goodness, like, I know that Sigmar's lightning didn't directly strike him, but how did this auric manage to survive? And then all of a sudden his head explodes into like this cloud of green blood, and you see Vandalus, the Knight of Zero, so the Astral Templar, standing behind him with his sword pierced all the way through from the top of his head, through his neck, down into his torso. And then he just kind of like kicks the body away, and it's kind of funny because before the battle they were, Rammus and Vandalus were speaking to each other a little bit. and they continue their conversation as if like nothing had happened. There was no battle, no conflict or anything to interrupt. And you just kind of see a bit more of like the personality of the Stormcast coming out, which I really enjoy as the additional opportunity to see the humanity within the Stormcast. But they continue on. They mop up the last of this, relatively small band of orcs, and they continue on towards these mountains that had a really interesting name. They were called the Yanka, I believe is how they pronounced it, mountains. And basically there's this one section in the mountains that's like a safe zone, very narrow pathway, because the story describes that in the realm of beasts long ago, even before chaos invaded the mortal realms, there was a tribe of Oryx that had grown in power beyond any other Oryx tribe that ever has been or ever was before, or probably ever will be. And they were called the Yanka tribe. And they were quite an impressive tribe of Oryx because, unlike most Oryx that favor either Mork or Gork, they either favor, the kind of tricksy nature of one or the raw, brutal mentality of the other. They actually combined both. And so both the gods of the Oryx, Oryx, blessed them. And they were victorious in battle over all their other kin. And Oryx grow constantly. The more they fight, the more they grow, the more they live, the more they grow, the more they live, the more they fight, right? Like all these are intertwined. And because they were blessed by both their gods and they were so skilled in both of the aspects of orkiness, they grew larger than any other orcs have ever been. And finally, they grew tired of war. It just wasn't a challenge for them. There was no one really worth fighting. All the other Oric tribes had been squashed, basically, and those that were upstarts were not worthy of their attention. And none of the humans or any of the other species that existed within the realm could match them. And so finally they grew bored and settled in the mountains that they had originated from. And after a time, the tribe kind of split on the Mork and Gork, sides. Those that were more skilled in deception and those that were more skilled in just physical violence. And, the tribe split. And so the tribe began to war amongst itself on these two sides because they were the only opponents worth fighting, right? And their Oryx, they always want to fight. They're not happy if they're not fighting. And around this time, Sigmar came to the realm of beasts and challenged the champion, the greatest champion of each side, to combat. And he said that, basically if I defeat your champions, I want peace between the two of you. And they agreed, and Sigmar did. He defeated the greatest champion from each of those two halves of the tribe and established a very narrow boundary line in between the two that was, kind of a peace zone, that so long as no one crossed into one side or the other, there would be no fighting. And so the Stormcast are aiming for that kind of peace zone as they're passing through this mountain so that they don't have to deal with these Yanka tribe. And as they're going through, it's kind of amusing to me anyways, Ramses, the Lord Relictor, decides that he's going to bring the head of this ogre. One of the other Stormcast removes the head from the zombified body, and they're going to bring him as a bit of a guide. And so Ramses is got this ogre on his back as they go marching along. And it was kind of funny. It kind of makes me think of Headpool, if you're familiar with that character. But as they're passing through this area, Ramses starts to get a bad feeling about, something's going to happen. And of course, as true to form ever since Star Wars, it happens, and we see skeletons just start bursting out from the ground on these mountains, in this mountain path, and start attacking. So you see that, Manfred had laid a trap for them. And so while they're fighting, Vandalus is sweeping through the path with his lantern, and he has all the prosecutors flying with him, just throwing down their hammers. And I thought it was pretty neat because Vandalus kind of shows the power of the Knight of Zeros, and that whenever he flies by with his warding lantern, any of the skeletons that are basically touched directly by the light of his lantern cease to be reanimate and just, turn back to a normal skeleton and just plop to the ground. And they're not reanimated, of course, because Manfred is not like physically there at that spot to raise them again. So we see how powerful that warding lantern can really be. Well, during this conflict, the Stormcaster getting whittled down because, while skeletons aren't particularly skilled at fighting, there's just so many of them that they can overwhelm these smaller group of Stormcasts. And Vandalus in one of his passes crosses out of this kind of neutral zone into one of the two sides, held by one half of the Yanka tribe. It doesn't really specify which. And all of a sudden, the mountains themselves begin to shift around them. And it's at this point that Rammus comes to realize that these mountains are actually the Yanka tribe. The Yanka tribe has lived so long and grown so big that they are literally the size of mountains. And so there's two of them that begin to wake, one on each side of the of this kind of peace zone. And Rammus and Vandalus appeal to these two Oryx to fight alongside them against the dead. He basically says that the Oryx and the Chosen of Sigmar have fought alongside before when there was a greater enemy worth fighting, and the Oryx understand who he and Vandalus are. They see the remnants of Sigmar's power. They remember Sigmar, even though obviously it's been an incredibly long amount of time because these Oryx have been stationary in their sleep for so long that literally trees and dirt, covers them. But, they, being big, dumb Oryx, don't really respond. They just kind of start swinging around or whatever. They don't really engage in a fight as of yet between each other. But they're kind of clumsy and they're just reaching around bashing at stuff. And so the Stormcast have to withdraw out of there if they're going to survive. And so some of them stay behind to be that rear guard to allow everybody else to retreat. And in this final scene of the conflict, there's a Stormcast by the name of Brachus, who is not a particularly important character. And by that I mean, like, he's not one that's, the entire story revolves around. He's mentioned a couple of times as the Stormcast that has the honor of having been reforged more than any other Stormcast in all of Sigmar's hosts. And as the Stormcast retreat, Rammus turns around and sees Brachus as the last Stormcast standing, fighting with his Gladys short sword and his warhammer, one in each hand, just smashing skeletons left and right, just piling them up before him, as he kind of is the last defiant Stormcast. And then Rammus turns away and they leave. And at the very end of this particular section of the audio drama series, he meets up, with the other Stormcast as they leave, and they are traveling to an area, I believe it's known as the Sea of Bones or something along those lines, and they know that Manfred has gone here, and because it's Manfred's plan to make Nagash pay, right? He wants to make everyone pay. Manfred is still the whiny little baby that he's been really forever, but especially since the end times. He feels so slighted, so wronged. No one respects him, and rightly so. And so Manfred wants to raise up an army and then march into the realm of death and take it to Nagash. And so really, what better place to begin raising this army than an entire sea of dead things, right? So that's where this particular segment leaves off. The Stormcast have pursued Manfred to this point. I imagine we'll see him again quite soon because the location is too central to his plans for him not to be present there. But this one just came out either today or yesterday. I just got through it today and had to get this video recorded and up because these are personally my favorites of all of the bits of the Age of Sigmar narrative thus far. But that's going to wrap this one up. So until next time, this is James, and happy gaming.